The weight of silence. The rain hammered against the windows of the small apartment in Brooklyn with an almost accusatory rhythm. It was 3:47 a.m., and Detective Marcus Churchill sat at his kitchen table, staring at the cold coffee that had long since lost any warmth it once possessed. The fluorescent light above buzzed intermittently, casting harsh shadows across his weathered face, a face that had seen too much in its 42 years. Marcus rubbed his eyes with calloused hands, the kind of hands that had held too many grief-stricken witnesses, signed too many reports that would never bring real closure. On the table before him lay a manila folder, its edges worn from constant handling. Inside were photographs, witness statements, and forensic reports from a case that had consumed him for the past 8 months, the disappearance of 15-year-old Elena Rodriguez. The girl had vanished on her way home from basketball practice on a Tuesday evening in March. No signs of struggle, no witnesses who saw anything unusual, no digital footprint after 6:23 p.m. when she texted her mother saying she'd be home in 20 minutes. Just, gone. Like smoke dissipating into the cold New York air. Marcus had worked hundreds of cases in his 19 years with the NYPD, but this one was different. Maybe it was the way Elena's mother, Carmen, looked at him during their weekly meetings, not with accusation, but with a desperate hope that was somehow worse. Maybe it was because Elena reminded him of his own daughter, Jasmine, who was now 17 and preparing for college applications. Or maybe it was simply that he was getting older, more aware of his own mortality, more conscious of the limited time he had to make things right in a world that felt increasingly wrong. He pulled out one of the photographs, Elena's school portrait from the beginning of the academic year. She had her mother's dark eyes and a smile that suggested she knew something funny that she wasn't quite ready to share. The basketball team captain. Honor roll student. Volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. Everyone who knew her said the same thing, she was one of the good ones. That phrase always bothered Marcus. As if goodness was supposed to protect you. As if the universe kept score and rewarded those who followed the rules. His phone buzzed, breaking the oppressive silence. A text from his partner, Detective Sarah Brennan, "You awake? I've been going through the surveillance footage again. Found something. Can you meet at the precinct at 6? Marcus typed back quickly, "I'll be there at 5:30. He stood up, his knees protesting the movement, a reminder of the injury he'd sustained 5 years ago during a foot chase through the Bronx. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked streets of his neighborhood. Even at this hour, the city hummed with a restless energy. A taxi hydroplaned through a puddle. A homeless man pushed a shopping cart filled with his entire world. A young couple stumbled home from a late night out, laughing about something that probably wasn't as funny as they thought it was. Life continued. It always did. That was what Marcus had learned in his years as a detective. People disappeared, families shattered, communities grieved, and yet the world kept spinning, indifferent to individual tragedies. He thought about his own family. His wife, Denise, had left him 3 years ago. She'd said she couldn't compete with the ghosts he brought home every night, couldn't live with a man who was more present for strangers than for his own family. She'd been right, of course. He knew that. But knowing something intellectually and being able to change it were two very different things. Jasmine still spoke to him, though their relationship had become strained. She was angry that he'd let the job destroy their family, angry that he'd chosen his sense of duty over his duties as a father. Another thing she was right about. But he didn't know how to be different. This work was all he knew, all he'd ever been good at. Marcus returned to the table and began organizing the files, preparing for his early meeting with Sarah. As he worked, his mind drifted to the conversation he'd had with Carmen Rodriguez just yesterday afternoon. They'd met at a small Dominican cafe in Washington Heights, the neighborhood where Elena had grown up. Carmen had ordered coffee but hadn't touched it. She just sat there, hands wrapped around the cup as if trying to absorb its warmth, and asked the question she'd asked every time they met, "Is my baby still alive, Detective Churchill?" And every time, Marcus gave her the same answer, "I don't know, Mrs. Rodriguez. But I promise you, I'm doing everything I can to bring her home. It was the truth, but it felt like a lie. Because everything he could hadn't been enough. 8 months, and they were no closer to finding Elena than they'd been on day one. The case had started like most missing persons investigations. The first 48 hours were a blur of canvassing, interviewing, searching. Elena's phone had been found in a dumpster 3 blocks from where she was last seen, wiped clean, SIM card removed. Her basketball bag was never recovered. There were no ATM withdrawals, no credit card activity, no social media posts. The investigation had turned up several potential leads that had ultimately gone nowhere. A registered sex offender who lived 6 blocks from Elena's route home had a solid alibi. He'd been in New Jersey visiting his parole officer at the time of her disappearance. A suspicious van that neighbors reported seeing in the area was traced to a florist making deliveries. A classmate who'd seemed overly nervous during questioning turned out to be hiding the fact that he was skipping school to care for his younger siblings while his single mother worked 2 jobs. Dead end after dead end. The FBI had gotten involved for a few weeks, but without any evidence of interstate trafficking or clear federal jurisdiction, they'd eventually stepped back, leaving it in the NYPD's hands. The media had covered the story extensively at first. A pretty, promising young girl from a working-class immigrant family was the kind of story that generated headlines. But as weeks turned to months with no developments, the coverage had dwindled. Other tragedies, other missing persons, other crises demanded the public's limited attention. But Marcus couldn't let it go. Wouldn't let it go. He glanced at the clock, 4:15 a.m. Still more than an hour before he needed to leave for the precinct. He made himself a fresh cup of coffee, his 4th of the night, and sat back down at the table. His apartment was small, sparse, almost monastic in its simplicity. After Denise left, he'd gotten rid of most of their furniture, keeping only what was necessary. The living room had a couch, a coffee table, and a television he rarely turned on. The bedroom had a bed, a nightstand, and a lamp. The kitchen had the essentials. That was it. Jasmine had commented on it once during one of her increasingly rare visits. "Dad, this place looks like a crime scene waiting to happen. It's depressing." He'd tried to laugh it off, but she was right. His apartment reflected his internal landscape, stripped down, functional, devoid of warmth or personality. He'd become a hollowed-out version of himself, defined entirely by his work and his failures. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle now. Marcus closed the Elena Rodriguez file and pulled out his notebook, an old-fashioned paper notebook that he preferred to digital notes. He'd filled dozens of these over the years, each one a chronicle of suffering and, occasionally, resolution. He flipped to a clean page and began writing, a technique his first partner had taught him years ago. When you're stuck on a case, write everything you know. Not in report format, but as if you're telling a story. Sometimes the narrative reveals connections you couldn't see in the data. What I know about Elena Rodriguez. She was 15 years, 7 months old when she disappeared. Born in New York to Dominican parents who'd immigrated 10 years before her birth. Father died of cancer when she was 11. Mother works as a home health aide, often pulling double shifts to make ends meet. One older brother, Miguel, aged 19, studying nursing at community college. Elena was responsible, mature for her age, had to be, given her family's circumstances. She helped care for her father during his illness. Took on household responsibilities without being asked. Never gave her mother trouble. She loved basketball. Point guard on her high school team. Not the most naturally talented player, but the hardest worker. Coach Rodriguez, no relation, said she was always first to practice, last to leave. Led the team in assists because she made everyone around her better. Good student, 3.7 GPA. Taking AP classes. Wanted to go to college, maybe become a doctor or a physical therapist. Knew education was her ticket to a better life. Well liked but not part of the popular crowd. Had a small group of close friends. No boyfriend, though several boys were interested. She'd told her best friend, Valeria, that she didn't have time for dating, she needed to focus on her goals. The day she disappeared, nothing unusual. Attended all her classes. Laughed with friends at lunch. Practice went normally, they ran drills, scrimmaged, coach gave notes. Elena seemed fine, happy even. Practice ended at 6 p.m. She was seen leaving the gym at 6:08 p.m. Sent her mother a text at 6:23 p.m. And then, nothing. Marcus paused, pen hovering over the paper. And then nothing. The phrase that haunted every missing persons detective. The absence of information was its own form of agony. He continued writing, documenting every interview, every piece of evidence, every theory they'd pursued. As he wrote, patterns began to emerge, not answers, but questions he hadn't fully explored. Why had Elena's phone been found so quickly, just days after her disappearance, but her bag never surfaced? Why go to the trouble of wiping the phone and removing the SIM card if you were just going to throw it away? It suggested someone with technical knowledge, someone who understood digital forensics. And there was something else, something that had been nagging at him but he couldn't quite articulate. He flipped back through his notes to the interviews with Elena's teammates. Most of them had said similar things, she seemed normal, happy, focused. But one girl, a sophomore named Keisha, had mentioned something in passing. Elena seemed a little distracted in the locker room, like she was thinking about something. But she was always thinking, you know. That was just Elena. Distracted. Thinking about something. It was nothing, probably. Teenagers were always distracted, always thinking about something. But it was a detail, and in cases like this, details were all you had. Marcus made a note to re-interview Keisha, to press for more specifics. What kind of distracted? Was Elena checking her phone? Looking at something? Waiting for something? He checked the time again, 5 a.m. He should get ready, head to the precinct early to review whatever Sarah had found. But something kept him at the table, pen in hand, feeling like he was on the verge of understanding something important. He thought about his conversation with Carmen yesterday. She'd said something he'd heard before but never really absorbed. Elena was my good girl, detective. She always did what she was supposed to do. That's why I know something bad happened. She would never just leave. She would never make me worry like this. Mothers always said that about their missing children. It was a universal truth. No parent wanted to believe their child could choose to disappear, could run away, could be involved in something dangerous of their own accord. And usually, they were right. But sometimes they weren't. Marcus wasn't suggesting Elena had run away, all the evidence pointed to something more sinister. But what if there was a part of Elena's life her mother didn't know about? What if the good girl image was incomplete, not because Elena was bad, but because she was human, complex, dealing with pressures and problems she didn't want to burden her already struggling mother with? He made another note, re-examine Elena's digital footprint. Social media, email, any online presence. Look for accounts mother might not know about. They'd done this already, of course. The tech unit had gone through everything. But maybe they'd been looking for the wrong things. Maybe they'd been searching for evidence of danger when they should have been searching for evidence of her inner life. Marcus finished his coffee and finally stood up, his body protesting the hours of sitting. He showered quickly, dressed in his usual work uniform, dark jeans, button-down shirt, leather jacket that had seen better days, and grabbed his badge and gun. Before leaving, he paused at his apartment door and looked back at the table, at the files and notebooks that represented 8 months of failure and frustration. He thought about what Sarah had said in her text, found something. Hope was a dangerous thing in this line of work. It could keep you going when logic said to give up, but it could also set you up for devastating disappointment. Marcus had learned to moderate his hope, to keep his expectations low. But as he locked his apartment and headed down to his car, he couldn't quite suppress the small spark of anticipation in his chest. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today they'd finally catch a break. The drive to the precinct took 20 minutes through the rain-slicked streets of Brooklyn. The city was beginning to wake up, delivery trucks making their rounds, early shift workers heading to the subway, bodegas raising their security gates. Marcus loved this time of morning, the liminal space between night and day when anything seemed possible. The precinct was a squat, utilitarian building that had been due for renovation for at least a decade. Inside, the familiar smells greeted him: bad coffee, industrial cleaner, the particular scent of stress and bureaucracy that seemed to permeate every police station in America. Sarah was already in the conference room they'd been using as their case headquarters, surrounded by multiple screens showing surveillance footage. She looked up when Marcus entered, her red hair pulled back in a ponytail, dark circles under her green eyes that matched his own. "You look like hell," she said by way of greeting. "Right back at you," Marcus replied, setting down his coffee and pulling up a chair. "What did you find?" Sarah's expression was serious, but there was an energy about her that Marcus recognized, the particular intensity that came when a detective sensed they were onto something real. "I've been going through all the surveillance footage from the night Elena disappeared," she began. "Not just from the immediate area, but expanding outward, looking at traffic cameras, business security systems, ATM cameras, anything with a timestamp around when she went missing." "We did that already," Marcus said, not dismissively but as a statement of fact. "We did. But I had a thought last night. We've been focused on Elena's route home, right? From the school to her apartment. But what if we've been looking at it wrong? What if she wasn't going straight home?" Marcus leaned forward. "Go on." Sarah pulled up a map on one of the screens, showing Elena's school, her usual route home, and her apartment building. "This is what we've assumed: she left school, started walking home via her normal route, and somewhere along these 6 blocks, something happened." "Right. And we've reviewed every camera along that route multiple times." "Nothing." "Exactly. Nothing. Which has always bothered me. In this city, you can't walk 6 blocks without being caught on at least 3 or 4 cameras. Even the dead zones shouldn't be that dead. So I started thinking, what if she wasn't on that route? What if she went somewhere else first?" Sarah pulled up another screen, this one showing footage from a traffic camera at an intersection about 4 blocks east of Elena's usual route. "This is from 6:31 p.m. on the night she disappeared. Watch the far right of the frame." Marcus watched. The footage was grainy, the rain making everything harder to see. But then he saw it, a figure in a hoodie and carrying what could be a gym bag, waiting at a crosswalk. "Is that her?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I think so. Height matches, body type matches, and look at the bag, similar to the one Elena was carrying that day. She's not walking toward home. She's walking east, toward Prospect Park." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Why would she be going to the park? It was raining, getting dark. That's the question. But watch this. Sarah fast-forwarded the footage. The figure crossed the street and disappeared from view. She pulled up another camera, this one from a deli about a block further east. "This is from 6:38 p.m. The same figure appeared, now closer to the camera. For just a moment, before she pulled her hood up further against the rain, her face was partially visible. "That's Elena," Marcus said with certainty. "Definitely her." "Agreed. And this is where it gets interesting." Sarah pulled up a timeline she'd been constructing. Elena sends her mom a text at 6:23 saying she'll be home in 20 minutes. But instead of heading home, she goes east. At 6:38, she's here, still moving east. And then she vanishes, Marcus finished. "Not quite. I found one more camera." Sarah pulled up footage from a small business security system. This store was closed, but their camera was still running. "This is from 6:44 p.m., at the edge of Prospect Park. The footage showed Elena, no question now, her face clearly visible, standing at the entrance to the park, looking at her phone. She seemed to be waiting for something or someone. She checked her phone multiple times, glanced around nervously, shifted her weight from foot to foot. And then, at 6:49 p.m., she walked into the park and disappeared from view. "That's the last time anyone saw her," Sarah said quietly. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. She went to meet someone. Someone she'd arranged to meet via text or some other form of communication we haven't found. That's my thinking. But here's the problem, her phone was wiped clean. Whatever messages or calls she made that day, they're gone. And we never found any other devices or accounts. So someone knew how to cover their tracks. Someone tech-savvy. Marcus paused. Or someone Elena told how to cover their tracks. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You think she was complicit in her own disappearance? Not willingly, not in the way you're suggesting. But what if she met someone she thought she could trust? Someone who seemed safe, who maybe gave her advice about privacy or security. And then that person used that trust against her. It was a theory, and like most theories in active investigations, it was built on assumptions and speculation. But it felt right in a way Marcus couldn't quite articulate. We need to find out who she went to meet in that park, he said. We need to tear apart her life, not looking for evidence of criminal activity or risky behavior, but looking for connections we might have missed. Who did she talk to online? Who did she interact with that her mother might not have known about? Sarah nodded. I'll get the tech unit to do another deep dive. And we should canvass the park again, show her picture around, see if anyone remembers seeing her that night. It was 8 months ago, Marcus said doubtfully. Even if someone saw her, they might not remember. We have to try. It's the first real lead we've had in months. Marcus stood up, feeling energized in a way he hadn't in weeks. Finally, they had a direction, a path forward. It might lead nowhere, most leads did, but it was something. Good work, Sarah, he said sincerely. Really good work. She gave him a tired smile. Just doing the job. Same as you. But it wasn't the same, and Marcus knew it. Sarah had a life outside this work, a husband who loved her, 2 kids in elementary school, hobbies and interests that had nothing to do with murder and missing persons. She could compartmentalize in a way Marcus had never been able to. As they began planning their next steps, pulling up maps of Prospect Park and compiling lists of people to re-interview, Marcus felt the familiar weight settling back onto his shoulders. Elena Rodriguez had walked into that park 8 months ago. What had happened to her after that? Was she still alive, held somewhere against her will? Had she been killed that night, her body hidden in a place they hadn't thought to search? The not knowing was its own form of torture, for him and especially for Carmen Rodriguez. But now they had something. A direction. A purpose. Marcus looked at the frozen image of Elena on the screen, standing at the park entrance, backlit by the glow of a streetlight, about to step into darkness. We're coming for you, he whispered. Wherever you are, we're going to find you. It was a promise he couldn't guarantee he'd keep. But it was a promise he'd make anyway, because that's what you did in this job. You made promises to the dead and the missing, and you worked yourself to exhaustion trying to keep them, even when the odds were impossible, even when the world had moved on, even when every rational part of your brain told you to let it go. The rain continued outside, washing over the city, and Marcus Churchill prepared to begin again the search for a girl who'd vanished into the night. Shadows in the park. The Prospect Park precinct house was bustling with the usual controlled chaos of a Thursday morning when Marcus and Sarah arrived at 8:15 a.m. They'd spent the past hour coordinating with the tech unit and planning their recanvassing strategy. Now they needed to bring Lieutenant Davies up to speed and get authorization for the expanded investigation. Lieutenant Frank Davies was a 30-year veteran of the NYPD, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of gravitas that came from having seen just about everything the city could throw at you. He listened to their briefing without interruption, his expression neutral as Sarah walked him through the surveillance footage. When she finished, Davies leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "So we're 8 months in, and you're telling me that we had the route wrong this whole time?" "Not wrong," Marcus said carefully. "Just incomplete. We were working with the information we had. Elena texted her mother saying she'd be home in 20 minutes, so we assumed she was heading straight home." "Assumptions," Davies muttered, though without real anger. "They'll kill a case every time." "All right, what do you need?" "Access to the full tech unit for another sweep of Elena's digital life," Sarah said. "And manpower to recanvass the Prospect Park area. We need to talk to everyone, residents, people who work in the area, homeless population, anyone who might have been there that night." 8 months ago, Davies repeated, skeptical. "In the rain. At night. You really think someone's going to remember one teenage girl?" "We have to try," Marcus said. "This is the first real break we've had." Davies studied him for a long moment. Marcus could see the calculation happening behind those tired eyes, weighing the resource expenditure against the likelihood of success, considering the political ramifications, thinking about all the other cases that needed attention. "All right," Davies finally said. "You've got 48 hours of priority resources. After that, if you haven't developed the lead into something concrete, we need to scale back. We've got 3 active homicides and 2 other missing persons cases that need attention." "Understood," Marcus said, though the arbitrary timeline frustrated him. Justice didn't work on a 48-hour clock. As they left Davies' office, Sarah's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then said, "We'll be right there." "What is it?" Marcus asked. "Tech unit. They might have something already." The NYPD's tech unit operated out of a converted conference room filled with computers, servers, and equipment that Marcus only partially understood. The lead analyst, a woman in her 30s named Patricia Chen, gestured them over to her workstation. "Detective Brennan said you wanted us to take another look at Elena Rodriguez's digital presence," Patricia said without preamble. "We did the standard sweep when she first went missing: her phone, her laptop, her known social media accounts. Everything was clean, maybe too clean." "Too clean?" Marcus asked. "Most teenagers leave a digital trail like breadcrumbs. Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Discord, you name it. Elena had accounts, but her activity was minimal. A few posts on Instagram, mostly related to basketball. Some group chats about homework. Nothing personal, nothing controversial, nothing that gave us any leads." "We know all this," Sarah said, not impatiently but as a fact. "Right. But I got to thinking, what if she had accounts we didn't know about? Accounts her mother didn't know about? So I started looking at patterns in her browsing history, looking for gaps or anomalies." Patricia pulled up several screens of data that looked like hieroglyphics to Marcus. Elena's laptop had pretty standard browsing history: school websites, YouTube, some streaming services. But there were these weird gaps. Times when her laptop was active, using bandwidth, but there's no record of what she was doing. "VPN," Marcus said, understanding dawning. She was using a VPN to mask her activity. Exactly. And not just any VPN, she was using Tor, the dark web browser. Now, before you jump to conclusions, Tor isn't just for criminals. Lots of people use it for legitimate privacy concerns. Journalists, activists, people living in countries with internet censorship. But it does raise questions about what she felt she needed to hide.